Why did Officer J. Man shoot? How could a 70-year-old black woman simply work in the park and be mistaken for a dangerous criminal? The community is furious, demanding answers. Mrs. Helen is dead, and the truth is even more shocking. Was it racism, fear, or something far darker that led to this tragedy? Watch to find out. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever seemed to happen, nestled on the edge of a quiet town. It was a place where life unfolded slowly, predictably. Families had lived here for generations. Neighbors greeted one another with smiles, and small acts of kindness were as common as the changing seasons. It was, by all accounts, a sanctuary. At the center of this community was a woman who embodied everything this neighborhood stood for. To some, she was a neighbor. To others, a friend. But to many, she was simply family. A constant presence who carried the wisdom of years in her soft-spoken words, her warm laughter, and her tireless efforts to care for those around her. But one day, everything changed. It began quietly, as most tragedies do. A door left ajar, a shadow where there shouldn't have been one. There was no warning, no sign that the fabric of this seemingly peaceful neighborhood was about to be torn apart. And when the first cries for help rang out, they were met with confusion. After all, this was a place where doors were left unlocked, where trust was never questioned. And then, the unthinkable, the discovery. A scene so shocking it sent ripples through the entire town, leaving behind only questions and silence. She was gone. A life so full of meaning, so deeply intertwined with the community, had been stolen in a moment of violence that no one could explain. The news spread quickly, like wildfire, igniting fear, anger, and heartbreak in equal measure. People gathered in hushed circles, asking the same questions over and over. Who could do this? Why? But the answers wouldn't come easily. Because as investigators began to piece together the events of that day, what they found wasn't just evidence of a crime. It was evidence of something far more profound, something deeply unsettling. The whispers began almost immediately. Whispers that carried through the halls of the local police station, the aisles of grocery stores, the pews of Sunday church services. They weren't just whispers of shock or grief. They were whispers of something darker. Whispers that hinted at a motive rooted not in greed or revenge, but in something far older. Something that had simmered quietly beneath the surface of this town for years, unnoticed by most, ignored by many, until it could no longer be contained. This wasn't just a murder. It was an act of hate, an act that tore through the heart of a community and left wounds that may never heal. And the more the truth came to light, the harder it became to look away. Because this isn't just the story of a crime. It's the story of a reckoning, a moment that forced a town to confront its deepest fears and its darkest truths. And yet, even as the case unfolded, as the evidence was revealed, and the suspect brought into the harsh light of public scrutiny, one question lingered. How could this happen? How could a place so defined by connection and kindness become the setting for something so unthinkable? This is the story of a life taken too soon, a crime fueled by prejudice, and an ending so unexpected, so shocking, it left even the most seasoned investigators questioning everything they thought they knew. To truly understand the weight of this tragedy, we must first know the woman at the heart of it all, a woman whose life, though now tragically cut short, left an indelible mark on everyone she encountered. Her name was Helen Johnson, though most in the neighborhood simply called her Miss Helen. Please, before we continue, quickly subscribe to this channel now for you to be the first to receive stories like this when it drops, and it serves as an inspiration to produce more contents like this for your consumption. Now let's continue. Helen was 73 years old, a retired schoolteacher who had spent over 4 decades shaping young minds at the local elementary school. She was more than a teacher. She was a mentor, a guide, and for many children, a safe place in a world that often felt overwhelming. Long after she left the classroom, she remained a figure of wisdom in the community, the kind of person people turned to when they needed advice or a listening ear. Helen's home was a beacon of warmth. Neighbors knew they could stop by unannounced for a cup of tea, a slice of her famous peach cobbler, or just a comforting word. Every Thanksgiving, she hosted a potluck dinner, inviting anyone who didn't have a place to go. And every Sunday, without fail, she sat in the same pew at St. Mark's Baptist Church, her voice carrying through the hymns with a quiet strength that inspired everyone around her. She lived in the same modest home for over 50 years, a small, single-story house with a well-tended garden. Her azaleas were her pride and joy, and she often spent her mornings kneeling in the dirt, wearing an old straw hat as she coaxed each bloom to life. Her front porch was adorned with wind chimes that sang softly in the breeze, a sound her neighbors had come to associate with her presence. But Helen's life wasn't without its challenges. She had raised 3 children on her own after losing her husband to a factory accident decades ago. Her youngest son, Michael, had been killed in a car accident at just 23 years old. Despite her losses, Helen carried on with grace, pouring her love into her remaining family and the community that had become her extended family. The community. The neighborhood Helen called home was a diverse, working-class area. It was a place where old brick homes lined the streets and where people still took the time to greet each other as they passed. But beneath the surface of this apparent harmony, there were tensions that had festered for years. The town, like many others in the region, had a history marked by segregation. Though progress had been made on the surface, remnants of that painful past lingered. The scars of redlining, unequal opportunities, and quiet prejudices were still evident in the division of the town, literal and figurative, into 2 sides. One side, predominantly white, held most of the wealth and resources. The other, where Helen lived, was predominantly black and often overlooked when it came to town improvements or investments. Helen, with her steadfast optimism, had always been a bridge between the 2 sides. She believed in the power of community and often worked to bring people together, whether it was through organizing charity drives, mentoring local teens, or simply offering her presence as a calming force. The suspect, but not everyone saw the world the way Helen did. Across town lived a man named Jason Turner. At 28 years old, Jason was a stark contrast to Helen in every way. He was a drifter, someone who worked odd jobs when he could find them, but who spent most of his time hanging out with the wrong crowd. He had grown up in the same town, but his path had been very different. Jason had a history of trouble, minor run-ins with the law, rumors of aggressive behavior, and a reputation for stirring up conflict. He was known for his loud opinions, ones that often turned into heated arguments, especially when the topic veered toward race or politics. While Helen worked to build bridges, Jason seemed content to burn them. What brought Jason and Helen's lives together remains a mystery to this day. They lived on opposite sides of town, their worlds separated not just by distance, but by ideology, experience, and outlook. And yet, their paths crossed in a way that would forever alter the course of the town's history. A personal moment. To her neighbors, Helen was more than just a friendly face. She was a storyteller. Children would gather on her porch on warm summer evenings, listening intently as she told them tales of her childhood. Her favorite story was about the time her father had taught her how to fish in the creek behind their house. She would laugh as she described the day she caught her first fish, only to throw it back because she couldn't bear the thought of taking its life. Her laugh. It was something people always mentioned when they spoke of her. It was warm, contagious, and unguarded. It was the kind of laugh that made you feel like you were home. The day before she was taken from this world, Helen had been seen at the local grocery store, smiling as she helped a young mother calm her crying child. She had offered to carry the woman's bags to her car, and when the woman protested, Helen had laughed and said, "You'll understand when you're my age. It's not heavy, it's life." For those who knew her, the loss of Helen Johnson was more than just the loss of a neighbor or friend. It was the loss of a light, a reminder of the goodness that can exist in people, even in the face of life's many hardships. And now, that light was gone, extinguished in an act of violence that no one could understand. As the town came to grips with what had happened, they couldn't help but wonder, why Helen? Of all people, why her? On a chilly Thursday morning, the kind where the world feels just a little quieter, Helen Johnson began her day like she always did. By 7:30 a.m., she was already in her garden, tending to her azaleas. Neighbors passing by greeted her with a wave, to which she responded with her usual warm smile. It was a small, unremarkable moment, a snapshot of the life she loved. By late afternoon, Helen had returned inside, likely to start her evening routine. She planned to attend her weekly Bible study that evening, something she rarely missed. Her house, as always, was welcoming. Porch light on, curtains drawn, the smell of dinner wafting through the open kitchen window. But somewhere between those peaceful moments of solitude and the next few hours, everything changed. The first indication that something was wrong came from Helen's next-door neighbor, Alice, a retired nurse. At around 7:15 p.m., Alice noticed that Helen's porch light, which usually stayed on until late, was off. Thinking it odd but not alarming, she dismissed it and went to bed early. It wasn't until the following morning that the silence around Helen's home became impossible to ignore. Her garden, usually a sign of her presence, looked untouched. Her wind chimes hung motionless in the cold morning air. When Alice knocked on the door, there was no answer. Worried, Alice called Helen's daughter, Tanya, who lived 2 towns away. Tanya hadn't heard from her mother since the previous evening and grew anxious. Within 30 minutes, Tanya arrived at the house, using her spare key to let herself in. What she found inside would change her life forever. Helen's body lay in the living room, just feet from her favorite chair. The signs of violence were unmistakable. Broken glass from a toppled table littered the floor, and blood stained the floral rug beneath her. Tanya's screams pierced the morning quiet, alerting nearby neighbors. One of them, a young man named Marcus, called 911. The first responders arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. Helen was gone. How the crime occurred. As investigators began to process the scene, a chilling picture emerged. The front door showed no signs of forced entry, suggesting Helen may have known her attacker, or at the very least, felt comfortable enough to let them in. The living room bore signs of a struggle. The broken table, an overturned lamp, and a trail of blood leading to the spot where Helen was found. But perhaps the most disturbing detail was the wound itself. A single, fatal blow to her head, delivered with an object that investigators initially couldn't identify. Neighbors later reported seeing a figure in a dark hoodie lingering near Helen's house the evening before her body was discovered. One witness, a teenager walking his dog, recalled hearing what sounded like an argument around 6:45 p.m., followed by the sudden slamming of a door. Despite these accounts, there was little else to go on. Helen's home, though disheveled, didn't appear to have been ransacked. Her purse remained untouched, her jewelry still in place. This wasn't a robbery. Whatever had happened to Helen, it was personal. Immediate aftermath. News of Helen's death spread quickly, and the community's reaction was swift and visceral. At St. Mark's Baptist Church, where Helen had been a member for decades, congregants gathered in disbelief. Pastor Robbins, who had known Helen for most of his life, described her as a pillar of grace. Many were brought to tears at the thought of such a gentle soul meeting such a violent end. Outside Helen's home, neighbors placed flowers, candles, and handwritten notes on her porch. One read, "We will find justice for you, Miss Helen." But alongside the grief, there was anger. For many, this wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a reflection of the underlying tensions that had plagued the town for years. Helen's daughter, Tanya, addressed the media just 2 days after the crime. Holding back tears, she pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. "My mother didn't deserve this," she said, her voice trembling. "She was everything good in this world. Please, if you know anything, help us find who did this." Key clues begin to emerge. The investigation, led by Detective Sarah Monroe, began piecing together the events of that fateful night. One of the first breakthroughs came from Helen's own security system. Though the footage was grainy, it showed a figure approaching Helen's front door around 6:40 p.m. The person, dressed in a dark hoodie and jeans, appeared to hesitate before knocking. Minutes later, they entered the house. Another crucial clue came from the autopsy. The medical examiner confirmed that Helen had been struck with a blunt object, a weapon that was still missing. But what caught investigators' attention was a faint smudge on Helen's left hand. After forensic analysis, it was revealed to be a partial fingerprint, likely from her attacker. Victim's last moments. Piecing together Helen's final hours was a painstaking process. According to her daughter, Tanya, Helen had spent the day running errands. Security footage from a nearby grocery store confirmed this, showing her chatting with the cashier as she paid for her groceries. At 5 p.m., She called a friend from church to confirm her attendance at Bible study later that evening. She was in good spirits, the friend later told police. She said she was looking forward to seeing everyone. By all accounts, Helen's evening should have ended like so many others, with her sitting in her favorite chair, sipping tea, and reading her Bible. Instead, she became the victim of a senseless act of violence, her life taken in a moment that left an entire community shattered. Trial and verdict. The trial began 8 months after Helen Johnson's murder, with Jason Turner as the defendant. Prosecutors built their case around a combination of physical evidence, eyewitness testimony, and Turner's own erratic behavior during interrogations. The surveillance footage of Jason's car near Helen's home on the night of the crime, paired with the fabric from his hoodie found on her fence, painted a damning picture. Prosecutors also highlighted his racist social media posts and history of altercations with black neighbors. The defense, however, argued that the case was circumstantial. Jason's lawyer claimed the fabric could have been planted and raised doubts about the reliability of the grainy surveillance footage. They also suggested that Robert Harris or even Carlos Vega could have been responsible, pointing to Harris's ongoing feud with Helen and Vega's fingerprint on her hand. Key witnesses included Helen's daughter, who gave a tearful testimony about her mother's fear of Jason, and Detective Monroe, who detailed the exhaustive investigation. However, the most dramatic moment of the trial came when Jason himself took the stand. Under cross-examination, Jason broke down. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he sobbed. "I just wanted to scare her, to make her stop meddling in things that weren't her business." His admission shocked the courtroom. While he stopped short of confessing to the murder, his words were enough to sway public opinion. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 3 days. On the third day, the verdict was read: guilty of second-degree murder. Sentenced to 25 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 15. Shocking ending. But just when the community thought the case was closed, a stunning revelation emerged. Months after the trial, Helen's family received an anonymous letter. The letter claimed that Jason Turner wasn't acting alone that night. It hinted at a conspiracy involving another individual who had a financial stake in silencing Helen's activism. Detective Monroe reopened the investigation. She discovered that Robert Harris had been receiving payments from a local development company, one that stood to benefit from the construction project Helen had been opposing. Phone records revealed that Harris had contacted Jason Turner multiple times in the weeks leading up to Helen's death. The new evidence pointed to a potential collaboration between Harris and Turner, but without a confession or more concrete proof, no additional charges were filed. The revelation left the community outraged, reigniting protests and calls for deeper investigations into systemic corruption and racial bias. Reflection. The case of Helen Johnson's murder became more than just a story of one woman's tragic death. It highlighted the intersections of race, power, and justice in a small town and across the nation. For Helen's daughter, Tanya, the verdict brought mixed emotions. "We got some justice for my mother, but it's not enough. She fought for this community, and we'll keep fighting for her." The town was forever changed. Racial tensions that had simmered for years were finally being addressed in community forums and town hall meetings. Activists used Helen's story as a rallying cry, pushing for reforms in policing and greater accountability for hate crimes. For Detective Monroe, the case served as a grim reminder of the challenges of seeking justice in a deeply divided society. This wasn't just about one crime. It was about a community reckoning with its past and deciding what kind of future it wants to build. Narrator voice closing the section. The murder of Helen Johnson shattered lives and exposed the cracks in a system meant to protect its most vulnerable. While one man now sits behind bars, the unanswered questions and lingering pain remind us of the work still left to do. In the end, Helen's legacy isn't just the fight she waged in life. It's the call to action her death inspired in all of us. The murder of Helen Johnson is a story that has left a profound mark, not just on her family or her community, but on all of us who have come to know her life, her legacy, and her tragic end. It raises a question that haunts cases like these. What does justice truly look like? Does it end with a verdict? Or does it live on in the changes we make and the conversations we have? We want to hear from you. What does justice mean to you in cases like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a dialogue that could help prevent tragedies like this from happening again. Engagement prompt. If you found this story compelling and believe that Helen's story deserves to be heard far and wide, please take a moment to like this video. Your support helps us bring these important stories to light. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that uncover the truth, highlight injustice, and honor the lives of those affected. And hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. If you're interested in learning more about cases that explore the intersections of race, justice, and community, check out our playlist stories. We cover cases like this one that challenge us to reflect, question, and act. Together, we can keep these conversations going, amplify these stories, and honor the memories of those like Helen Johnson who have been taken far too soon. Please share and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching.